Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé. This show always airs every Friday on WPVM-FM in Asheville and on Saturdays, KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. We have Walter Parks to thank for our theme song. If you'd like to know more about Walter's music, walterparks.com. If you'd like to reach me, Navé@jamesnavé.com. Here's a challenge for you. Can you send me one word that captures how you're feeling today after you listen to this episode? Just one word. I'd love to hear what that word is. Navé@jamesnavé.com. Here's another way you can reach out to me. If you like to write and you're looking for a free community gathering of writers, you can always go to imaginativestorm.com, and there you will find a link to 2 free online Zoom writing workshops hosted by James Navé, that's me, and my creative collaborator, Allegra Houston. We gather on Saturdays at 12 noon Eastern Time for an hour, and on Thursdays, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a great community. We've had people call in from every continent except Antarctica. We've got our fingers crossed. One day, we're hoping we'll get a scientist from the McMurdo station down there in Antarctica calling in, wondering what to write about next. Speaking of next, today my guest is Leandro Reyes. Leandro is a prominent Filipino spoken word poet, storyteller, and performer based in Metro Manila. I met him last February when I had an opportunity to go to the open mic he hosts, one of many. He calls it Third Thursdays. I was expecting something interesting. I was really well rewarded with people dramatically experimenting with spoken word. And the thing that was most impressive about what the Third Thursday open mic group was doing, it was the support, how they cheered everybody on. And the second thing that impressed me quite a lot, the room was full. Leandro was one of the many MCs. He is one of the leaders in the spoken word movement in the Philippines. That said, he quickly reminds anyone he's talking to what they're doing in the spoken word movement in the Philippines is definitely a group effort led by many people, himself included. So in this conversation, we cover the history of the spoken word movement in Manila. Leandro touches on his great-grandfather, who was a literary figure in the 1800s in the Philippines. He talks about how he is helping to foster a community of spoken word artists, not only in Manila, but throughout all the islands that make up the Philippines. I'm looking forward to going back to Manila in November and attending more of his shows. Leandro is also planning a 2026 tour of America, so you might be able to get to see him in person. Leandro also told me that he is most influenced by an American poet named Ocean Vuong, and in the spirit of collaboration, the first part of this show is my conversation with Leandro, and the second part of the show is a conversation I recorded with Ocean Vuong a few years back. It's evergreen conversation. Ocean has a lot to say about poetry, and I really appreciate having this interview as part of my archive. So for now, let's turn to my conversation with Leandro Reyes. I begin by welcoming him to the show. Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thanks for having me, James.
I'm curious. Tell us in the States, those people especially interested, fans of spoken word here in the States, give us a sense of what's going on in Manila. Why are you all so excited about this, and how come it seems so vital? Is it just because everybody in your community has fallen in love with the spoken word, or is there something even beyond that?
Harking back into your intro, you said that I am the leader of spoken word poetry, or one of the leading voices. I am one of many. My show in Manila is one of the best attended shows. To answer the question of what's going on, spoken word is making a comeback. It was here before I started, but it wasn't really flourishing. No regular events were happening. Started in 2008, 2010. And then it just died down because the people who were doing the spoken word events went into different directions. There was the emergence of it in 2015. That's when I came in. Me and my colleagues. Since 2015, I just never stopped, even through the pandemic, to continue on. We did spoken word podcasts during the pandemic. I was one of the handful of people who just didn't stop ever since we started. We're now trying to develop slam, and slam is also very underexplored here. That's where our sites are at the moment.
Poetry Slam, competitive poetry judged like a diving match, conceived and launched in Chicago in 1983 or 4 by Mark Smith. It has grown around the world and continues to this day to have a great deal of momentum. Why do you think it's something people are interested in Manila, and how come the Poetry Slam is starting to emerge now rather than a generation ago?
I'm pretty sure slams have been done in the past already. In fact, I've attended a few of them. We do them as one-off events, not as regular events, not as annual or monthly events. And we don't have a major slam. And that's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to propose fairly flexible guidelines so everybody could do it and have once a year a slam produced by spoken word artists, made by spoken word artists, filmed by everybody in the back and would be spoken word artists, which makes this slam a little different because every little thing around and in it is thought of and thought about spoken word artists. Everything is still in its conception phase. We're very excited about it.
The Poetry Slam, conceived here in the States, is judged by 5 judges from the audience. The judges give the poets scores as they perform on stage. The poems are mostly memorized, occasionally improved, but mostly memorized, fairly tight, choreographed, coached, etc. And then the judges give the score, drop the high score, drop the low score, keep the middle 3. Somebody at the end of the evening wins, the person with the highest score. And the idea behind the slam is not to throw your opponent on the stage and jump up and down on them. It's, can you connect emotionally so well that the audience rises to their feet in great joy in the same way that a baseball stadium would rise if their team slams a grand slam at the very end of the game and wins. So that's a winner kind of sensibility. So the win is the emotional connection as much as the scores or the money. How does your slam conform to those ideas, and how are you revising it? Because the slam has been revised many, many times. It's made for revision. So what are you doing in Manila that makes it different, or is it the same?
It's not much different. What we're trying to do right now, provide a little bit more structure. We assign spoken word artists to be judges for our slams. In a conversation with a colleague, we're talking about how open spoken word is in the Philippines. And we've enjoyed that for the longest time. In the slam, at least in its first few installments, we're providing more groundwork, a solid base. The foundation is rich and we can take off from there.
In the States, people judge, and the judges are chosen arbitrarily from the audience. The idea behind that, folks walk in, they have no idea what they've come to see. Some people have no concept of poetry. We used to say we want the person who's never been here before and doesn't even know a poem to judge, because we want them to have that first initial experience. In the States, people don't mind judging low, they don't mind judging high. They're generous up to a point. I know that I've spent a fair amount of time in Manila over the years. One of the things about the Manila culture or the Filipino culture, people are very supportive and they're very generous and they cheer each other on. And that was the best part of what I saw at your venue and the venue of your collaborators. Everybody supports everybody. So I am thinking choosing spoken word judges prior to the slam would probably be a good idea, because if you arbitrarily chose members of the audience because they're so supportive, they'd give all the poets 10s and it wouldn't be a competition. So there are lots and lots and lots of ways to go about doing it. The Poetry Slam is a subset of the spoken word movement.
Yeah.
The spoken word movement is a subset of storytelling.
Yeah.
So really, at the end of the day, we're talking about the oral tradition and how you can fit different ways into it. One of the things I like about the slam in terms of its structure is the 3-minute time limit. And 3 minutes forces the poet to do what poetry has always done, which is create a form that has a strict regulatory governance, while at the same time finding explosive imaginative leaps within the context of that form. And that's what makes poetry work. And that's why the 3 minutes is good. Also, the 3 minutes is there to keep poets paced along so that the show moves fast. Because at the end of the day, the only important people in the room are the people who are in the audience, not the poets. The poets are secondary to the audience.
Spoken word is it's a very communal thing for us. Really, really just about the community. In fact, before our talk, I was in a meeting with a community builder in Palawan, one of our islands. We're talking about collaborating and having a show in July with one of the community builders that will be coming over from Malaysia. We were talking about space. We were talking about how spoken word easily allows us to get together and introduce each other slowly and commune in poetic beside each other, watching the same poem, listening to the poet. Those are the connections we look for, we crave almost.
One of the criticisms I have of the Poetry Slam, and the criticism also then shines light on what I like about spoken word. The problem I sometimes have with poetry slams, I know people who are very, very good at it. I've watched you perform. You can really do that high level engagement from a poetry slam, energetic, engage the audience point of view. A lot of people can't do that. So when
Yeah.
people come to the poetry community and they see these top-notch slam poets up there really pushing it out and getting cheers and the audience yells and somebody wins, great. If you want to enter that arena, more power to you. I can help you do that. You can help the people in your group do that. But the people in the back who are shyer, the people who have a poetic voice, but they don't quite know what to do with it, they sometimes feel intimidated by the poetry slam performers because they think this is the only way to go. If you can't get a cheer like that, why do it? Spoken word, on the other hand, says your voice is valuable no matter how you deliver it, whispered or yelled.
I fully agree. Our core value in all of the things that we do is we pride ourselves with having our spaces as safe as they come, with whatever story that you have to come with. The instructions that I give when I huddle the open micers before my shows, like a handful of them I haven't even met yet before the show starts. The intro goes something like, so you have 5 minutes of stage time. And also, our only rule is to be respectful of everybody. You don't have to filter anything. You can perform something that might be against the beliefs of another person in this room. Just don't go against the person in the room and you'll be okay. That's all we ask. Everybody is on board. Thursdays thrives because of the poetry, the music, how well the production is made. It thrives because people go there because they could be easy for the next 2 hours, not be guards up. They could just listen and like what they like, dislike what they dislike, be respectful all throughout, and expect to be respected for the next 2 hours. That's why we make the space in the first place.
Poetry can be unsafe. It can disrupt. I like the idea, and I promote this too. We have a safe space. And yet, in that safe space, you challenge yourself with ideas that might disrupt your own status quo. Have you seen that happen in your venue?
Yes, there were a few instances where we had a performer who was disrespectful and misogynist. Like I said, sometimes I don't know the performers. They just come in, they register, and since we don't have filters, for as long as they register, they can perform. This person clearly spewed out misogynistic beliefs, belittling women. It was in that moment where nobody in the crowd clapped. The performance was done. People are not forced to applaud anything that they don't like. They waited for the performer to end. Nobody clapped. And it wasn't violent, and the night carried on. The safety of the space naturally and organically overcame the unsafety of small content.
So I'm understanding you to say nobody clapped.
Yeah, nobody clapped. The crowd that we attract knows that we should be respectful of other people. This person was not booed off stage. He wasn't escorted outside the venue. He was allowed inside. He was allowed to finish the show. But we didn't really support his views. And the people who didn't want to interact with them didn't interact with them. After a while, he left. I think we handled that properly. There were a few conversations after of how we could prevent that from happening again, make sure that we are not in support of the statements. In fact, we are against the statements, but not against the person. We just deleted the footage. We spoke to the person. We're not going to post it because we don't really agree with what you're saying. We're not going to shame you for it, but we want you to know that that kind of content disrespected a lot of people here. And we just want everybody to feel respected in the space.
I don't think I've ever heard a story like the one you told me that includes no clapping at all. There's usually one person in the back that claps or something. So the idea of silence being the judgment is very, very powerful.
I think so too. I think so too. It was a moment everybody remembers it. And it wasn't awkward, which I think made it special because it was a statement in itself that happened unintentionally. This person came alone. It's not like he came with one friend and that friend clapped. Nobody was really supportive of anything that he was saying. It was very disrespectful.
Let's shift the subject just a little bit. I know that I think it's your grandfather or one of your relatives years ago was quite influential in the literary community in Manila in the 1800s. Could you tell us a bit about that relative and why you're inspired by that tradition?
The name of the person we're talking about is Severino Reyes. Pen name is Lola Basyang. Severino Reyes is the father of Filipino Zarzuela, a very influential writer who made ang mga kwento ni Lola Basyang, translating roughly to the stories of grandmother Basyang. This influenced me a lot because as a child, mga kwento ni Lola Basyang, the collection of Severino Reyes, is being used in elementary schools and preschools even while I was growing up. I always just knew growing up that these are my great grandfather's stories. You don't really think how big people are. People are people. It's influential for me because of the value of storytelling. Everybody in their human nature knows how to tell a story. I am in love with that idea. I am in love with how better you could communicate how painful your knee scratch is if there's a story behind it. Silence could turn into something powerful because you know the story behind the silence. That's always been a value that I hold dear. We need to value storytelling, but also we need to provide spaces where we could share our stories, hear other people's stories. Right now, that's what I'm trying to do. My moniker as a writer is the Basyang Kid. The goal of the Basyang Kid is to really continue on the effort to make storytelling and poetry very accessible and very communal.
This is a good opportunity for me to invite you to offer us some poetry that you've written. I'd love to hear in both languages or whatever language you'd like to offer.
Of course, of course. There is a book that I'm working on. It's currently in the crowdfunding phase, and I'll read from that. The collection of poems that I'm currently producing called The Abundance of Such and Such. And this poem is called Crimson. It has a passage to begin the poem. The passage says, "You hid my tooth under the rug. According to the fairy, light enters the wound as fever." Crimson. Tail end of summer, and we painted the fruits of our only apple tree orange. Not orange, actually. The tin reads metallic sunburst. Nice ring to it. You sit on your side of the couch and write letters inside the open Sudoku squares because you think, as a poet, I would appreciate the ironing. Like your joke containing an elaborate death of a dove. Somehow funny. I know tenderness because you hold my knee while I laugh about bloodshed. Teeth are placeholders of whim. Laughter, a display of stories or lack thereof. I saw warmth in its brightest form when you looked at me with several pieces of red apple stuck inside your smile. That's called Crimson. There are two characters in this collection, and they are talking to each other of the abundance of uncanny dwelling places. Do you want another
Give me another one in English and then one in Tagalog.
Okay, sure. Um, the one in English is about English as a language overtaking of Filipino or Tagalog. How corporate companies here prefer English speakers instead of very intelligent non-English speakers. The title of the poem is Pray for the Fish. And this one I perform in spoken word. So I have it memorized. In my country, it does not snow. It heavily rains until we freeze. We curl up inside our blankets, never mind where the water comes from. In my country, the children play under alulod waterfalls, and puddles of rainwater are made for fun. My country does not have a word to translate hello. We say kumusta and respond with kumusta. Centuries of defense has taught us to check on our comrades' well-being before the first beat. I live in a country where we pray for fish and eat pig's blood. We don't cringe at the sight of balut. Why would we? We take the insides of chickens and ducks and feed it to our children. Only then can we call it a barbecue. In my country, the neighbor calls me anak. The other kids, anak. Nanay is more than just a word for mother because everyone's mother is everyone else's tita. I refuse to call strangers stranger. Instead, I say kya. I live in a mamsir nation, mamsir. A resilient rice importing, supposedly exporting nation, mamsir. I live in a country who overvalues the English language relation, mamsir. So go ahead and tell me that I have a nice accent for a Filipino, but don't bother telling me to shove it down my throat because it's already there, and I'm sorry that it's already there. In dismay and a lot of sarcasm, Dr. Ralph Lawrence Fonde said, English is the language of the future. No wonder the future isn't as colorful as it used to be, ma'am sir. When I die in my countrymen will not say he was a writer. No. Instead, they will say, yumao siya, isang manunulat. My country tells me, death will not strip me of verse, of song. Life might strip me of life, but my country will not. My country was built on continuance, on the continued revolution, on the revolutionary pakshet, which probably means I don't care if you don't care, because I do, and my language does. Ako, ang anak ng inang bayang pagod na sa kapapaliwanag. Nakasaksak sa dila ko ang tinik ng Ingles sa kada pangungusap. Itong sangsang ng malansang isda sa hininga ko ang signos ng di pag-alpas nakakahiyak. Itong lamat ng dayuhan sa wika kong angkin. Kaya sorry kung di ko kayang mag-thank you. Salamat. That was Pray for the Fish.
Well, you could do that 3 more times and I would be very satisfied. Thank you very much for that. Well done. How do you feel about bouncing back and forth between English and Tagalog? And do you speak other dialects as well?
I mainly speak English and Tagalog. I slightly understand other Filipino dialects and languages because of intonation and similarity of words. How I feel about it is very natural, I think, mainly because it's just how we live now. We bounce in and out of English and Filipino. We can translate the word sorry in Filipino and it would be paumanhin or it would be patawad, which loosely translates to could you give me more allowance? We don't even use that anymore. We don't say patawad anymore. We don't say paumanhin anymore. We say sorry. We say salamat, still very much used, but everybody just uses thank you. It feels natural for me. I'm very happy that I can write fluently, even poetically, in 2 different languages. How Filipino and Tagalog has been thrown around and undervalued hurts a little. We had spaces in our elementary schools where we had English only policies. If you spoke Tagalog or Filipino, you would accrue a certain level of penalty to train us to be better English speakers. And look at us now. It's a rough feeling that sits in my heart.
And what about Spanish? It's part of the culture as well. Not as much, but still there, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Not Spanish as a means of communication, as a medium. The Spanish influence in our language are the words that we use that are not Filipino or not Tagalog words. We call the chair Celia. Celia isn't really Filipino, it's Spanish. We can translate chair to salumpuit, but nobody really says salumpuit. Everybody just says Celia or mesa or la mesa. Our language is peppered with Spanish words and English words and Tagalog words. It's just how we communicate. That's how everybody understands everybody.
Shifting a little bit back to what you're doing in the spoken word world, now that we have a bit of a background going all the way back to the 1800s, why you were motivated to show up and do this, carrying on the tradition, the love of the language, all of that. You are quite engaged in the digital space, podcast, Instagram, TikTok. I've watched your offerings from your venue, and they're quite modern in the sense of advanced, professional people in your group know what they're doing. Can you speak to that a bit? And as we move on out, tell us about the venue you work in and give a bit of a shout out for the people that help you in that venue because it's a terrific spot, I have to say.
Mhm.
Centrally located, no doubt.
The modernness of our spaces is something that I had to learn. Initially, I was one of those people who was saying, if you want to experience poetry in its fullest, nicest form, just come over. There are no barriers of entry. If you can't really afford the ticket to the venue, just tell me and I'll let you in. That's why for the longest time we weren't on TikTok. For the longest time we weren't on any of the social media platforms. We weren't recording. We weren't live streaming. None of that. And then one of our staff approached me and said, I think we're missing the point of community if we're not properly recording everything because we lose accessibility. Accessibility is one of our major values. If somebody couldn't be in Metro Manila and watch the show because he lives in another island in the Philippines, we are not allowing this person to watch the show if we don't do proper recording and we don't properly engage in social media. And that's what got me. Like I said in the beginning, for me, it's all about community. It's all about inclusivity. If you can join, no matter where you're from, and you can consume poetry no matter where you're from, I'm happy to provide that. The venues we have currently, we have three major venues. One is Globe Telecoms supporting Third Thursdays. We also have Linya Linya, provider to the venue, and also helps us with our merch and Alt Space Studio in Maginhawa, along with Street Kohi in Quezon City. These venues are very central to the growth of our shows in Metro Manila.
In closing, is there anything else you'd like to tell folks? How do they connect with you? If people are in Manila and they want to come to the show, how do they do that?
Yeah, Third Thursdays, as you might have clued in, happens every third Thursday of the month. It's a once a month gathering where everybody's welcome. We have one guest of the night, but we have 10 open mic slots. Please feel free to reach out. I'll be personally happy to guide you through if you want to see poetry. I'm happy to set aside time. My book, The Abundance of Such and Such, we're trying a route where it's crowdfunding. For the Philippines, our options for authors are send your manuscript to the universities and the presses and pray to all the gods that you get in, or be rich enough and have enough resources to print it yourself. We have an abundance of writers. A lot of them don't have access to either one of those two options. So I am thinking maybe there's a third option. Maybe crowdfunding is alternative way to it. It's very communal also. It's very inclusive also. But I can't really advise anybody to do crowdfunding without any experience. So I'm using my own book as a case study. I'm one of those poets who has done this enough. Both options are available to me. In fact, some publishers have already reached out saying they wanted to print my book. But I want to be honest in this effort and really try it out and really see if crowdfunding is an option in the Philippines to produce books. The link of the crowdfunding effort is in my Instagram. My Instagram is LR Basyang. That's LR for Leandro Reyes, Basyang for Lola Basyang. And you'll find all the information there.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be with us. I really, really do appreciate it. And I'm looking forward when I come back to Manila to have some time in the venue and hear more spoken word.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoy talking about spoken word. Can't stop talking about it, really. Thank you very much.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Leandro Reyes. And now let's turn to a conversation I recorded a few years back by Ocean Vuong. The reason I'm airing it is because Leandro said Ocean was one of his favorite poets and authors. Leandro told me he had a number of Ocean's books on his show, and I thought, what a good pairing. Leandro and Ocean have much in common. First, they're both in their 30s. Second, they're both leaders in the poetry communities they represent. And third, they have a deep commitment to poetry, which will clearly sustain both of them for the rest of their lives. So now let's turn to my conversation with Ocean. As I said, I recorded it a number of years ago during the summertime here in Taos, New Mexico, where I'm recording this now. And I began by asking Ocean to describe the environment he's in. And so he begins the conversation by offering you that description. So here's Ocean Vuong.
There's horizons after horizons piled on top of one another. And I'm looking at these beautiful blue mountains. And it just seems like something that is so conducive and forgiving to the creative mind. I think oftentimes in cities, the sounds are always competing with your thoughts. A landscape like this is, in a way, a canvas in which your mind is allowed to roam and to continue to explore itself and stretch out. And I didn't expect that to happen. When I came here, and it's been the past 4 or 5 days, my mind has just been reeling, and I can see why Georgia O'Keeffe decided to set roots here, among other great writers and artists.
How do you draw from the circumstances around you?
Pay attention to the world. I think, oftentimes we have this weird sense that creativity comes from this inspired moment. Even the word inspiration comes from the Greek root of to be breathed into. So we often we're expecting this eureka moment, this light bulb flashing, coming on. But I think it's actually a lot more mundane, painstaking, but also less glamorous than that. I think just paying attention to the minutiae of your environment with the faith that at any given moment something can happen, even if it's just stillness, something can come out of that.
In the workshop that you talked about how you have a different view of work.
Work is very interesting. I think I come from a family of rice farmers, and I think it's very important to me that work, even creative work, remains and is focused on the body, work coming from the body, moving through the body. And I try to resist notions of production where, I don't want to pressure myself to produce a certain amount of pages, a certain amount of words. We often hear how creative work is often qualified through quantity. And I think it's often arbitrary, because no matter how many words you have, no matter how many pages you have, if you haven't done the quote-unquote work of asking those questions, pushing yourself to interrogate the wonders and joys of your subjects, then the work has not actually been done. So I take myself away from actually writing or producing, and I put the work in my body. I'll take ideas and subjects. I go on walks. Or even just my best lines come when I'm doing dishes, believe it or not.
Absolutely.
Talk about work, cleaning the house or whatnot. And just constantly paying attention and caring for your obsessions, nurturing them, watering them. You talk about irrigation, and I think that's what it is. Creative work is irrigating your mind, irrigating your subjects and your themes with questions that propel you forward, that enrichen your project, rather than just sitting down and telling, oh, well, I better get, 10 or 20 pages down today or else I'm a failure. Oftentimes that's how we think, and I think that's quite toxic to the creative mind.
And you and I have talked a bit about our rural backgrounds.
Yes.
And so I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about growing up with that rural mindset, and how does that inform the work you do now?
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, my grandfather is an American veteran, and he met my grandmother when he was serving in Vietnam. And it was very strange that neither of them had been to the big city in their respective countries. My grandmother was from Gò Công in the rice paddies. My grandfather was in rural Michigan, where he would step out in his front porch and there'll be no other lights for miles, and it's just fields of wheat and corn. And Saigon was the first metropolis that they've ever stepped into. And despite not knowing the language to speak to one another, my grandfather didn't know Vietnamese, my grandmother didn't know English, they understood each other through the memory of where they came from. I think they were able to joke and laugh about, you know, the ridiculousness of city life coming from their roots. And that was their bond. And ultimately they fell in love from those roots. And so to me, I always carried that mindset with me, because that's the morals. You know, it's not just the landscape, it's the morals, it's the values that come out of that, for better or for worse. It's just how we are made up. And, you know, we were talking, and you said that even to this day, you know, you feel so guilty going to a fancy restaurant when you can cook so well at home, you know. And I feel the same way. Even though we could afford these luxuries that our parents couldn't have, we still hear them talking in our head, you know, oh, this, you know, for this much, or $50 for this, you know, I could do, so we can hear them. And I think that never really leaves us.
Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, my grandmother would make German chocolate cake. And I was so excited to get the German chocolate cake, and I would go out to her place, and she would cut a tiny sliver, because she was determined to make that German chocolate cake last for 2 weeks. Today we made breakfast.
Yeah,
I cooked a dozen eggs and made all kinds of quinoa and stuff.
Yeah.
Served it, and I felt so tidy.
It's pride too. It still instills in us a sense of pride. I love that. You know, I think that a lot of Americans are that way. You know, sometimes we think that the metropolis is the only place where things are worthwhile or things are new and fresh and valuable. But I think a lot of Americans perhaps come from these rural roots, and they have to hide it. They have to perform the metropolis vernacular and suppress their own. And it's very interesting to see even myself moving from one space to another and code switching, if you will.
You grew up in Hartford, so that was not country, nor is New York. So would it be fair to say that the country you remember is the country of your grandmother's stories rather than your own personal experience?
Absolutely. And like I said, it was the morals and values of the country, and even the accent, right? We talked about this.
I think that's a great story.
The accent of, you know, the whole time growing up, I thought I was speaking Vietnamese, just like any other Vietnamese person. But when I was on a panel of Vietnamese American writers, we had a question proposed to us at the end, and everybody answered in their Vietnamese. And I realized how different it was from mine. And I realized that their Vietnamese was the educated Vietnamese. It's the Harvard Vietnamese, right? And then I said, oh Lord, I looked in my head and I said, well, the only Vietnamese I got is the Appalachian Vietnamese.
Exactly like what
So I said, oh Lord, here we go. They're not, you know, they're in for it here, you know. So when it came my turn, I just spoke the only Vietnamese I knew. And in English, I'm quite articulate. And so when I started speaking, I saw everyone in the audience sort of take a little jolt. and the people on my panel, they turned to me a bit, and then I can imagine them thinking, who the heck let this guy, let this country bumpkin in, you know? And it sounded like I was in the backwoods, you know? But that's the only Vietnamese I knew. I'm proud of that, because that is my truth, and that is my first language. That is my mother tongue, even though it's sort of breached sort of social moments and borders. I'm okay with that. I actually think it's the outsiders, people who speaking a dialect or a vernacular outside of the standard, that are most innovative. Like, for example, my mother often says, and I don't even know if this is an actual Vietnamese word, you can find this in a dictionary, but oftentimes, because of a limited vocabulary, my family and the people from my village would sort of have emotional onomatopoeias, if you will, right? So like bang is an onomatopoeia. There's emotional ones that Vietnamese do. So like if you're confused You would say, galofo, fuckfo. You said, she's galofo, fuckfo, right? And that's one word that they would just say.
So it's just all of those syllables are just one word.
Yeah. And Vietnamese is monosyllabic, right? But it kind of broke the rules in itself when it says make up that sound, and you can feel it. You can actually feel chaos and disorientation. It sounds like a butterfly careening in the fields. It's galofo, fuckfo, right? And again and again, there's all these emotional onomatopoeias to describe things that are more accurate, I feel, bodily, sonically, than the definition itself. And so people are always inventing new ways to speak. I grew up, of course, in Hartford, in a predominantly black community when I arrived in America. And what we tell one another there, when we instead of hello or how are you, is what's good. And it's very telling. You can tell about the lives of the people when how they greet each other, because it's a rough neighborhood. There's a lot of poverty. Many people are down and out and don't have jobs, and it's tough. It's almost as if pain is a given. We know there's pain, so we want to know what's good off the bat. I think it's a very beautiful way to communicate with one another, that I want to introduce myself with knowing what's your best, right? What is your best? Because it's been rough for everyone. And so we say, hey, what's good? Hey, what's good? And then you go from there. It's always the outsiders who are innovating language and making it exciting.
You have some traction in your work. We came home last night and I read your wonderful essay in the New Yorker. So, so you're finding you're finding your way into all kinds of recognition at the top level of what poets aspire to. Could you talk a little bit about how you've enjoyed being able to work at that level and be recognized at that level, and talk about what your goals are as a poet with the kind of notice that you've been getting? I know I've read the New Yorker articles about you. You've been reviewed in the New York Times. You're on NPR, all of the venues. Yeah. How are you working with that? What is your goal now that you have a platform that large?
I don't think my goals ever changed. I think I'm surprised. I don't think any poet is foolish enough to expect to be in these spaces. You gear yourself with rejections, and I myself get rejected all the time. I mean, that's the life of the poet. What you see is just the small, brief moments, often very lucky moments. My goals have never changed. I think for me as a writer, language is an act of communication. Poetry is an act of communication. Otherwise, I would write in my journal, and that would be okay too. But I made a commitment to communicate with my fellow human beings. And the way I see it is that these venues are means of that communication. It gets more eyes on it. I can speak to more people. And beyond that, that's the only value that I really see in it. I don't see any of the prestige, although I realize that's all there. I see these venues as just means of transport. Very good means, respectable means of transport, but that's what it is to me. If you're riding on the subway, you get on and then you focus on where you need to go. You don't stay on the subway and check it out, or you don't examine it. Oh, should I live here? Is this what kind of chairs? What kind of plastic are these chairs made of, or what have you? You just get on. And when it's time to get off, you get off, and that's what I see publication is. I send something to something. I say, is this a good vehicle? Is this a good bus? Is this a good train? And if it's good enough, I'll get on. I'll get to where I need to go, find my people, and then continue. I don't want to be attached to the prestige, because that is abstract and it's not a potent place to create new work.
So in closing, I'd like to ask you to read one of your pieces.
All right. Well, we've been talking about fields, and this little piece was me imagining my parents at the moment of my conception. They spent a lot of their times in the field because it was where they had privacy at night. And I imagine many people from rural places can recognize this, that the night and the field is their room, their moment of intimate space. Like anyone else, they fled there and hid from adults, and is where they were able to love each other. And of course, there's biblical references to Eden as well. That's always on my mind. That's the Western influence. A little closer to the edge. Young enough to believe nothing will change them. They step hand in hand into the bomb crater. The night full of black teeth. His faux Rolex, weeks from shattering against her cheek, now dims like a miniature moon behind her hair. In this version, the snake is headless, stilled like a cord unraveled from the lover's ankles. He lifts her white cotton skirt, revealing another hour. His hands, the syllables inside them. O Father, O foreshadow, press into her as the field shreds itself with cricket cries. Show me how ruin makes a home out of hip bones. O Mother, O minute hand, teach me how to hold a man the way thirst holds water. Let every river envy our mouths. Let every kiss hit the body like a season, where apples thunder the earth with red hooves. And I am your son.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes the conversation I recorded with Ocean Vuong a few years ago when he was here for the Taos Poetry Festival. He was one of the features. If you'd like to read Ocean's work, you have 4 choices, 2 poetry collections: Night Sky with Exit Wounds, 2016, Time is a Mother, 2022, 2 novels, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, 2019, and his latest publication, The Emperor of Gladness. This is his 2nd novel, and it centers on a teenage boy and his unlikely bond with an elderly widow with dementia. In May 2025, Oprah Winfrey highlighted The Emperor of Gladness, celebrating its portrayal of marginalized lives and personal resilience. Ocean reflected on how Oprah's influence in his mother's nail salon inspired him. As we move toward the end of our time together, I'd like to take these few last moments to offer you something you can use right away. It's a writing prompt. This will be very useful for you if you are engaged in writing. If you're not so much inclined toward writing, it still will give you something to think about. I first did this exercise at a week-long writing retreat held at Omega Institute. The retreat was hosted by Marie Howe, and she's the one who facilitated this exercise. My creative collaborator Allegra Houston and I used this same exercises a couple of weekends ago at the Estelle Center for Creative Arts in La Veta, Colorado, during a weekend Imaginative Storm writing workshop. Even though it's a writing exercise, it's also an exercise in paying attention, sharpening your awareness, and listening. It's important to do this exercise by taking notes with your imagination, not with pen and paper. So here's the exercise. It takes very little effort to do this. So here's how it happens. Leave the room that you're in and go outside. Find a spot somewhere outside and choose an object in the environment. It's interesting to choose an object that's alive, like a little pine tree or a plant, or watching closely the edge of a stream. You can also choose something like a stop sign, or the wheel of a tire, or an old can rusting in a field. Once you choose the object, you have a very simple task. Sit very still and observe the object from an investigative forensic point of view for 20 minutes. Set a timer, 20 minutes. This focuses your awareness. Most of the time we view the environments we're in with large sweeps, collecting a bit of data as we go along. Oh, there's the door. There's the stove. The light's on over in the corner. Look outside. There's a Range Rover with some tires on it, some gravel. I see a bird in the distance. I hear a meadowlark. As you're looking at this object that you've chosen, you will soon realize the object is not alone. Your focus is simply narrowed down to that object. What you will also see and notice and get a deep sense of is how much movement is going on around this little object that you've probably never looked at before. When you look at something for 20 minutes, it's impossible to avoid noticing the things that change around it. Now, as you're sitting there, take in every detail you possibly can. Note everything. Did the ants crawling up the side of the little tree you were looking at turn into a well-organized expedition into an ant wilderness? If you're looking at a larger tree, did the bark on the tree start to send messages to you, maybe by way of images you noticed in the bark's configuration that you hadn't noticed before? This is a form of meditation with a reverse goal in mind. In meditation, you're asked to release all the thoughts and let them float away. In this work, you're asked to record the observations you make in your memory and keep them there as evidence for later use. And remember, you're timing this, so at the end of 20 minutes, your timer will ding. So here's where the writing comes in. First of all, leave the location where you observed the plant or the can or whatever it is you were looking at. Go back to another area, possibly your desk in your studio, your house, your kitchen, wherever you like to write. We want you to do this longhand because when you're writing longhand, it connects you to the physicality of who you are, to your emotional interior, a bit like a magic wand. The difference between writing longhand with a pen or a pencil and the magic wand, we don't quite know if you can cast a spell with a magic wand, but we know for sure you can cast a spell with a pen or a pencil. So you're going to do 3 timed 10-minute pieces of writing. If we were in a workshop together, I would run the time for you. Since you're operating solo, you'll have to do it for yourself. So here's what you do for the first 10-minute timed writing. Before you start your timer, take as much time as you like to really imagine what you just saw. Think about the details, the wind, the air, the sounds, the smells, things you were thinking about, where you went in your head while you were looking at this object. The first 10-minute timed writing is simple. Describe exactly what you saw. When your first 10 minutes is up, turn the paper that you've written on over so you can't see it. Get ready for the second 10-minute timed writing. Here's what you do. Describe, once again, in a 10-minute time frame, exactly what you saw. This second time writing, even though it's exactly the same assignment as the first, it will produce very different results than the first one. When your 10-minute time runs, turn the second one over face down on top of the first one, and now let's turn to the third section. In this third piece of writing, you're going to change the vibe. Before you write, I'd like for you to spend 3 minutes thinking about somebody you really love, somebody that's dramatically significant to you, the most valuable person you can think of. Doesn't matter who it is, you know who that person is. Once you get that person firmly set in your mind and the feelings that come along when you think of somebody you really care about, those will be set as well. Now set the timer for 10 more minutes, and the third time, describe exactly what you saw, and while you're describing it, think as deeply as possible about the person you love, and yet in the writing during the 10 minutes, never mention the person. Just think about the person and use the description that you're creating in the third round as an opportunity to hold the energy you feel for this person in your writing, yet you're not describing the person, you're describing the object, like the pine tree or the can or the shoe or the beautiful bed of roses that you were looking at, whatever it is. And once you finish with the third piece of writing, you have 3 pieces of writing, and now comes the spoken word part. Read all 3 aloud, starting with number 1, followed with number 2, followed with number 3. The point of this work is to illustrate dramatically, with very little effort, how everything you have around you can be incorporated into the creative work you do. It also demonstrates how, with a little bit of change of perspective, a change of time frame, first 10 minutes, second 10 minutes, third 10 minutes, something very different comes out each time. It suggests, maybe even proves, we all have a creative range much more dramatic and expansive than we may think. If you do happen to do this exercise and would like for me to read what you write, please feel free to send me the text that you've written. I'd love to read it. You can also tell me your experiences that you had around it. Navé@jamesnave.com. Navé is spelled Nave. And so there you go. That brings us to the end of our time together. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Leandro, also the conversation with Ocean, and the little workshop at the end. Can't wait to hear what you think about that one. So, again, thank you ever so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio. fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7, streaming online, WPVMFM.org, Radio Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. If the spirit is moving you to become involved with a writing group, I host 2 free Imaginative Storm writing workshops on Zoom with my creative collaborator, Allegra Houston. One is on Saturday between 12 and 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and another is on Thursday between 6 and 7 Eastern Time. ImaginativeStorm.com if you'd like to learn more about that. We do have a good time, and it teaches us a lot, and we'd love to have you be part of our community. So, once again, thanks ever so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio, and I hope you come back very soon. Until then, maybe, just maybe, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere out there in this big, wide world we live in. Again, thanks ever so much, and come back very soon.